Imagine being 7 months pregnant, abandoned in the bitter cold of winter, with nothing but the clothes on your back and nowhere to go. As night falls and the temperature drops below freezing, you realize you've made a fatal mistake. Your fingers go numb, your strength fails, and as you collapse into the snow, you whisper an apology to your unborn child, believing these are your final moments. But fate has other plans. A lone figure emerges from the darkness, a Navajo chief living in exile, a man with every reason to leave you to die, yet he chooses compassion instead. Today, we share the extraordinary true story of Emily Collins, a pregnant woman left to die in the Colorado mountains, and Chief Makya, the man who saved not just her life, but her soul. Their unlikely bond would challenge the deepest divisions of the American frontier and change the course of many lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The winter of 1885 was particularly cruel in the Colorado mountains. Old-timers in Silverton would later recall it as the season when the snow piled 6 feet high and wolves grew bold enough to snatch dogs from porches in broad daylight. But for Emily Collins, the bitter cold outside was nothing compared to the chill that settled over her heart when she returned to their rented room to find it emptied of her husband's belongings. No note, no explanation, just empty drawers and the lingering scent of cheap perfume that wasn't hers. Thomas had been on a winning streak at the poker tables for 3 nights running, unusual for a man whose gambling typically left them poorer. Now she understood why. He hadn't been planning to bring those winnings home. Emily pressed her hands against her swollen belly, feeling the reassuring kick of the child within. 7 months along now, the baby was the one constant in a life that had just shattered around her. Mrs. Collins. The landlord's voice from the doorway held no sympathy, only business. Your husband sold me your wagon yesterday, said you'd be leaving today. His eyes darted to her pregnant form, then away. Rooms already promised to the new school teacher coming in on tomorrow's stage. There must be some mistake, Emily said, her voice steady despite the roaring in her ears. My husband wouldn't, your husband did, the landlord cut in, not unkindly but firmly, and he settled his tab at Jensen's saloon by signing over next month's rent to them. Way I see it, you've got until sundown to figure something out, but then I need this room clear. The hours that followed became a blur of humiliation. Emily moved through Silverton like a ghost, approaching each shopkeeper and church elder with the same desperate request for temporary lodging. The answers varied, in gentleness but not in substance. No room, can't help, ask someone else. The mining camps are no place for a woman in your condition without a husband, the preacher's wife told her, pressing a small bundle of food into Emily's hands. Behind her, the preacher stood in the doorway, arms crossed. We can arrange transport. To a home for unwed mothers in Denver, he offered, his tone suggesting charity while his eyes held judgment. I am wed, Emily said, the gold band on her finger suddenly feeling like the heaviest lie. My husband will return. He wouldn't abandon his child. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were false. Thomas Collins had been abandoning them in increments for months, first with the drinking, then the gambling, then the late nights that left her alone with her fears and growing child. His final desertion was merely the culmination of a long goodbye. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow-covered street, Emily found herself at the edge of town, the small bundle of possessions she'd managed to salvage clutched in frozen fingers. Pride and desperation made poor companions, but they were all she had left. The road to Durango stretched before her, a ribbon of white cutting through the vast wilderness. 20 miles. Under normal circumstances, it would be a day's journey, by wagon. On foot, in her condition in winter, it was madness. But the alternative was to stay in a town that had made it clear she wasn't welcome. "Just keep walking," she whispered to herself, to her child. "We'll find shelter before dark." The first hour wasn't so bad. The food from the preacher's wife, hard biscuits and dried apple slices, gave her enough energy to maintain a steady pace. The second hour brought pain to her lower back and feet. By the third hour, as the sun began its early winter descent, Emily realized her terrible miscalculation. The temperature dropped rapidly with the sun. What had been merely cold became bone-chilling. The road, increasingly obscured by drifting snow, became harder to follow. When Emily paused to catch her breath, the silence of the mountains pressed in around her, complete and terrifying in its vastness. No birds called, no distant voices or wagon wheels broke the stillness. There was only her ragged breathing and the occasional crack of a snow-laden branch giving way somewhere in the forest. "Keep going," she told herself, but her body was beginning to shut down. Her fingers, despite being tucked into her armpits, had gone from painful to worryingly numb. Her steps became shuffling, uncertain. Each time she stopped to rest, it took more willpower to start again. As the last light bled from the sky, Emily Collins faced the truth she had been avoiding for hours. She was going to die here. The realization brought not panic, but a strange floating detachment. Wasn't this what Thomas had done to her anyway? Left her for dead, just more slowly and cruelly. When her knees finally gave way, Emily didn't fight the fall. The snow cushioned her, surprisingly soft. This wasn't so bad, she thought distantly. The cold didn't hurt anymore. In fact, a dangerous warmth was spreading through her, the body's final lie before freezing to death. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered, one hand cradling her belly. "I tried. I'm so sorry." As consciousness began to slip away, Emily thought she heard something. Footsteps, perhaps, or just the wind playing tricks. Her last clear thought was regret that she would never see her child's face. 2 miles away, in a small valley, protected from the worst of the mountain winds, Chief Makia of the Diné people paused in his preparation of evening medicines. Something had changed in the air, not just the coming storm, but a disturbance in the natural order that his 45 years had taught him to recognize. Makia's small stone and timber hogan, built 3 winters ago when he first chose exile, over conflict, stood apart from any established trails. Few knew of this place, which was precisely why he had selected it. Here, he could maintain the old ways, practice the healing arts passed down through generations, and avoid the slow death of spirit he saw claiming those of his people who had surrendered too much to the white man's world. It hadn't been an easy choice. His younger brother Talon, now leading in his place, had argued bitterly against Makia's departure. "The people need their chief," Talon had insisted during their final confrontation. "Not a hermit hiding in the mountains while the world changes around us." "The people need their traditions," Makia had countered. "Someone must keep the old knowledge alive while you bargain away our lands, piece by piece." The division had threatened to tear the tribe apart. Elders supported Makia's traditionalist views, while younger warriors rallied behind Talon's pragmatic approach to survival. Rather than see bloodshed between brothers, Makia had chosen to remove himself, taking only his medicine bundle, hunting weapons, and the sacred items necessary to maintain his spiritual practices. For 3 years, he had lived in solitude, returning to the reservation only twice yearly to share gathered medicines and participate in essential ceremonies. It was a life of purpose, if not happiness, of service, if not companionship. Lately, though, even purpose had begun to feel hollow. A persistent cough had taken hold in his chest months ago, growing worse with each passing week. The white man's disease, consumption, had found him despite his isolation. Some mornings he woke with his sleeping furs spotted with blood from his lungs. Makia was not afraid of death. All life moved in cycles, returning to the earth to be reborn. But he feared leaving his work unfinished, the old knowledge untransmitted. No students had come to learn from him. His self-imposed exile, meant to preserve tradition, threatened to become its grave instead. These thoughts occupied him as he ground pine bark and sheep tallow into a salve for his chest, his movements automatic after years of practice. Outside, the wind changed direction suddenly, bringing with it a scent that didn't belong, something human, something foreign. Makia set aside his mortar and pestle, listening intently. No obvious sounds disturbed the evening beyond the normal creaking of snow-laden branches, yet the feeling persisted. Someone or something was out there, something that should not be in these mountains as night fell. Following instinct rather than clear evidence, Makia wrapped himself in his heaviest buffalo hide coat and stepped out into the gathering darkness. The cold air triggered an immediate coughing spasm that he suppressed with effort, not wanting the sound to carry. When he could breathe normally again, he studied the terrain around his dwelling. Fresh deer tracks caught his attention, the same young buck he had been observing for days, judging whether its life should be taken to sustain his own. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The tracks led toward the higher pass, unusual behavior for deer at dusk when they typically moved downslope to sheltered feeding grounds. Something had startled it, perhaps. Without clear purpose beyond curiosity, Makia followed the deer's trail, moving silently despite the snow. Years of hunting had taught him how to distribute his weight, how to place each foot to minimize sound. The tracks led him nearly 2 miles up the slope toward the barely visible path that connected mining settlements. As he crested a small ridge, the deer's trail veered sharply away, but something else caught Makia's eye, a dark shape against the snow where no shadow should fall. Approaching cautiously, hand resting on the knife at his belt, Makia discovered what had disturbed the natural order of his mountain evening. A woman, collapsed in the snow, her body curled protectively around the distinctive swell of advanced pregnancy. His first instinct was to retreat. White people brought nothing but complication and danger, especially to a solitary Indian living outside reservation boundaries. If she died here, and she would within hours if not minutes in this cold, no one would blame the wilderness. Mountains claimed many lives each winter. As he turned to leave, the woman moved slightly, a small sound escaping her blue-tinged lips. Not quite conscious, not fully unconscious, caught in the dangerous twilight state that preceded freezing to death. Makia hesitated, torn between self-preservation and the healer's oath he had taken as a young man. All life is sacred. All suffering calls for compassion. With a resigned sigh that formed a cloud in the frigid air, he knelt beside the woman. Her skin had taken on the waxy paleness of severe hypothermia, her pulse weak but present when he pressed fingers to her neck. More concerning was the slight rigidity of her limbs. Freezing had begun in her extremities. When he carefully turned her onto her back, her eyes fluttered open briefly. Recognition, then fear, flashed across her face. She tried to struggle, but her body was too far gone to respond properly. "Be still," Makia said in the English he rarely used anymore. "Your child will die if you fight me." At the mention of her baby, the woman's resistance ceased. Her eyes, a startling blue against her pale face, held his for a moment before sliding, closed again. Makia worked quickly, knowing that every minute decreased her chances of survival. He removed his buffalo coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her with a grunt of effort. She was not a small woman to begin with, and the pregnancy added significant weight. His chest protested the strain, another coughing fit threatening to overtake him. "Not now," he muttered to his rebellious lungs. "Later you can complain." The journey back to his hogan was slow and arduous. Twice he had to stop and rest, his own strength compromised by months of illness. By the time he pushed through the door covering of his dwelling, sweat had frozen on his brow despite the exertion. Inside, the banked fire provided minimal warmth. Makia gently laid the woman on his sleeping platform, then quickly built up the flames. Heat was the first medicine she needed, followed by careful attention to her frozen extremities. Frostbite had likely claimed some of her fingers and toes already, but proper treatment might minimize the damage. As he worked, removing her sodden outer garments, wrapping her in dry fur blankets, preparing warm herbal infusions to raise her core temperature. Makia considered the strangeness of this turn of events. 3 years of solitude, broken by the most dangerous kind of company. A white woman, pregnant, clearly abandoned or lost. When he had chosen exile, he had imagined many futures for himself. Becoming the unlikely guardian of a white woman and her unborn child had never been among them. The woman's eyelids fluttered as he dripped warm broth between her lips, careful not to allow her to choke. Her gaze, unfocused at first, gradually sharpened on his face. "Where?" she began, her voice barely audible. "Safe," Makia replied simply. "Drink." She complied, too weak to do otherwise. After a few sips, she slipped back into unconsciousness, her body surrendering to the exhaustion that followed near death by exposure. Makia continued his ministrations through the night, applying salves to her damaged hands and feet, keeping the fire well fed, monitoring her breathing and pulse. By dawn, her color had improved slightly, and her breathing had become deeper, more regular. He allowed himself a moment of professional satisfaction. The woman would live, and likely her child as well. What came after that? What he would do with her once she was stable, how he would explain her presence if others came. These were problems for another day. For now, it was enough that he had not turned away when it would have been easier to do so. The path of the healer was rarely simple or convenient, but it was his path, chosen long ago, and he would walk it with all its unexpected turns. Outside, snow began to fall heavily, covering their tracks, isolating the small hogan further from the world. Nature, at least, seemed to approve of his decision, buying them time before choices would need to be made. Emily awoke to unfamiliar sensations. The earthy scent of herbs and smoke, the gentle crackle of a fire, and a dull pain throbbing in her extremities. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind. This wasn't the rented room in Silverton, nor was it the cold mountainside where she had collapsed. Opening her eyes slowly, she found herself in a circular dwelling, the ceiling low and conical, a small fire burning in a central pit with smoke rising to an opening above. Memories crashed back, Thomas's betrayal, her desperate journey, the bitter cold, and finally, the face of the man who had found her. An Indian. Moving slightly, she discovered her hands and feet wrapped in some kind of poultice that smelled of pine and herbs. The wrappings were neat and purposeful, clearly medicinal rather than simply for warmth. Across the small dwelling, the man who had rescued her sat cross-legged on the floor, grinding something in a stone mortar. His long black hair was streaked with gray, his face weathered by years and elements, a prominent scar running across his left cheek. He seemed unaware that she had awakened, his attention focused entirely on his task. Emily tried to speak, but her throat was raw from the cold air she had breathed during her ill-fated journey. Only a dry rasp emerged, yet it was enough to catch the man's attention. His dark eyes lifted to meet hers, expression unreadable. "You're awake," he said simply, setting aside his mortar. His English was accented but clear, surprising her with its fluency. "Good. I was beginning to worry." My baby!" Emily managed to whisper, her hands instinctively moving to her abdomen. "Still there, still moving!" He rose in a fluid motion that belied his age and approached with a wooden cup filled with steaming liquid. "Drink slowly. It will help with the pain." Emily hesitated, caution warring with necessity. Stories of Indian savagery had been commonplace in every frontier. Town she'd lived in, lurid tales told around fires and in saloons, newspaper accounts of raids and killings. Yet this man had saved her when her own kind had turned her away. "Why did you help me?" she asked, accepting the cup with trembling fingers. The herbal mixture inside was dark and unfamiliar, its scent pungent but not unpleasant. The man watched, her sip before answering. "Why did your people not help you? A woman with child in winter, this is not how humans should behave toward one another." The simple truth of his words brought a flush of shame to Emily's cheeks, though the shame wasn't hers to bear. "My husband abandoned me. The town. They didn't want the burden. So I gathered." He returned to his place by the mortar and pestle, resuming his grinding. "I am called Makia, Chief Makia of the Diné, though I have not lived among my people for some time." "Emily Collins," she offered in return, taking another sip of the bitter tea. Already she could feel warmth spreading through her limbs, dulling. The pins and needles sensation in her fingers and toes. "How long have I been here?" 3 nights have passed since I found you in the snow." Emily nearly dropped the cup. 3 nights? I've been unconscious for 3 days? Makia nodded. "Your body was very cold. It took time to bring the warmth back safely." He gestured to her wrapped extremities. "There is damage to your fingers and toes, but I believe you will keep them if infection doesn't set in. The medicines should help." Emily looked down at her hands. Even through the wrappings, she could see the discoloration of her fingertips, a mottled purple-black that spoke of severe frostbite. The realization of how close she had come to death struck her anew. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the magnitude of what he had done. "I owe you my life, and my child's." Makia acknowledged her thanks with a slight nod, but offered no platitudes about it being nothing or what anyone would have done. They both knew better. Instead, he asked, "Where were you trying to go when I found you?" "Durango," Emily replied, knowing how foolish it sounded. "I thought I could walk there before nightfall. 20 miles in winter with child." Makia shook his head. "You would need 3 days in good conditions, not 1 afternoon." "I had nowhere else to go," Emily said softly, the hard truth of her situation settling in her chest. "I still don't." Makia didn't immediately respond. Instead, he rose again, this time to tend to the fire, adding several pieces of wood from a neatly stacked pile near the dwelling's entrance. As the flames grew higher, Emily took the opportunity to study her surroundings more carefully. The hogan, as she would later learn it was called, was small but meticulously organized. Herbs hung in bundles from the ceiling beams, drying in the warm air above the fire. Various containers, some woven baskets, others clay pots, lined the walls, presumably holding supplies and medicines. Weapons, a bow, several arrows, a rifle that looked well maintained if somewhat dated, hung on the wall farthest from the entrance. Everything had its place, speaking to a mind that valued order. "You cannot travel until you have healed," Makia finally said, settling back into his spot. "Even then, the winter makes the mountain paths dangerous. You will stay here until spring thaw makes the journey safer." It wasn't a question or an offer, but a statement of fact. Emily felt a momentary flash of indignation at having her immediate future decided without consultation, but reality quickly tempered her reaction. What choice did she have? Where else could she go? "I don't want to impose," she said, the politeness, ingrained from her Eastern upbringing, sounding absurd even to her own ears, given the circumstances. A sound that might have been a suppressed laugh escaped Makya. "You are already imposing, but you will earn your keep when you are stronger." "How?" Emily asked, curious despite herself. "There is always work, mending, cooking, preparing medicines. I will teach you." Makya returned to his grinding, a signal that the immediate conversation was concluded. Emily sipped the remainder of her tea in silence, trying to process the strange turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been a respectable miner's wife. Now, she was a homeless, abandoned woman, pregnant and dependent on the goodwill of a solitary Indian chief, living in exile. The situation was so far beyond her previous experience that she had no framework for how to respond. As she set the empty cup aside, weariness washed over her again. Her body, still recovering from its ordeal, demanded more rest. "Sleep," Makya said, observing her drooping eyelids. "Healing requires rest." Emily didn't need to be told twice. She sank back onto the fur-lined sleeping platform, questions still swirling in her mind, but lacking the energy to voice them. As she drifted off, she wondered what Thomas would think if he could see her now. The thought, oddly, brought not distress, but a grim satisfaction. She had survived his betrayal. She would continue to survive. The next week passed in a haze of healing and gradual strengthening. Emily slept more than she was awake the first few days, her body demanding recovery time. When conscious, she watched Makya go about his daily routines, tending the fire, preparing medicines, cleaning his weapons, stepping out for hours at a time to check traps and hunt. He was neither overly solicitous nor coldly distant. He treated her with the matter-of-fact attention of a healer toward a patient, changing her bandages, preparing special teas and broths to build her strength, showing her how to massage her damaged fingers and toes to encourage blood flow and healing. On the 4th day, she was able to sit up properly. On the 5th, to stand briefly. By the 6th, she could move around the hogan, though her feet still pained her when she put weight on them for more than a few minutes. Each small victory felt monumental after coming so close to death. It was on the 7th day that Emily first heard Makya cough. He had stepped outside to bring in more firewood, and when he returned, a spasm racked his body, deep, wet, and worryingly prolonged. He turned away quickly, but not before she saw him wipe blood from his lips. "You're ill," she said, the realization hitting her with unexpected force. This man who had seemed so capable, so strong despite his years, was fighting his own battle for survival. Makya shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her observation. "It is nothing." "It's not nothing. That's consumption." Emily had seen enough cases in mining towns to recognize the symptoms. "How long have you had it?" Makya placed the wood by the fire before answering. "Since summer. It comes and goes." Emily knew this was unlikely to be true. Consumption didn't simply come and go. It progressed, sometimes slowly, sometimes rapidly, but always forward. The blood-stained handkerchief he quickly tucked into his sleeve told the real story. "There are medicines for it now," she said cautiously. "In the towns, doctors have treatments that can help." Makya's expression hardened slightly. "White doctors and white medicines are not for me. But if they could help, enough." His tone brooked no argument. "I have my own medicines. They have kept me alive this long." Emily fell silent, recognizing she had overstepped. She was a guest, or perhaps, more accurately, a charity case, in this man's home. She had no right to question his choices about his own health, yet the knowledge remained, sitting uncomfortably between them. The man who had saved her life might well be dying himself, refusing help out of pride or distrust, or some combination of both. The irony wasn't lost on her. As days turned to weeks, a routine developed. Each morning, Emily awoke before Makya. stoking the fire and preparing a simple breakfast from their limited supplies. As her strength returned, she took on more tasks, mending Makia's worn clothing with neat stitches, learning to prepare the various herbs and plants he used in his medicines, keeping the hogan clean and organized. True to his word, Makia taught her not just the practical skills needed for their immediate survival, but deeper knowledge of the mountain environment around them. He showed her which plants remained accessible even under snow, which could be used for food, which for medicine, which to avoid. He explained how to read weather signs, how to recognize when a storm was approaching days before it arrived, how to listen to the forest for signs of danger or opportunity. In return, Emily shared what she knew. She read aloud from the small Bible she had kept in her pocket during her desperate flight from Silverton. She told stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, of her father's general store where she had learned accounting and inventory management, of her mother's garden where she had first learned about medicinal herbs, though of a different tradition than Makia's. She spoke little of Thomas or their marriage, and Makia didn't ask. Some wounds were too fresh to examine. The baby grew within her, stronger and more active with each passing day. Sometimes, when a particularly vigorous kick would make her gasp, Makia would look up from his work, a rare hint of amusement crossing his normally stoic features. "A warrior," he would comment, before returning to whatever task occupied him. One evening, as a winter storm howled outside, Emily found the courage to ask the question that had been growing in her mind since she learned of Makia's illness. "Why do you live alone? You mentioned you're a chief. Why aren't you with your people?" Makia was silent for so long that Emily thought he might not answer. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, his profile sharp in the wavering light. "Sometimes," he finally said, "to serve your people, you must leave them." Emily waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "My brother Talon and I disagreed about how our tribe should face the changing world. He believed we must adopt white ways to survive, trade more, fight less, send children to white schools where they forget our language and customs." Makia's voice remained even, but Emily could hear the underlying pain. "I believed we must hold to our traditions, maintain our identity. The disagreement divided our people, young against old, brother against brother." He poked at the fire, sending sparks upward. "Rather than see blood spilled between us, I chose to leave. I come to the reservation twice each year, bringing medicines, participating in ceremonies. The rest of the time, I live here, preserving the old ways, the old knowledge." "That must be lonely," Emily said softly. Makia glanced at her, something unreadable in his dark eyes. "Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. One can be surrounded by people yet deeply alone." The truth of his words resonated with Emily. How many nights had she lain beside Thomas, feeling miles apart despite his physical presence? How many times had she stood in a crowded general store or church, feeling invisible and insignificant? "Yes," she agreed, "I know that feeling well." A moment of understanding passed between them, more profound than any they had shared previously. They were both outcasts in their own way, she abandoned by husband and community, he self-exiled. To prevent a greater tragedy, the storm outside intensified, wind shrieking around the sturdy hogan, but within, a different kind of atmosphere had formed, one of mutual recognition and respect. They were no longer simply rescuer and rescued, but two humans, acknowledging each other's struggles and choices. "Your child will be born when the first wildflowers appear," Makia said, changing the subject. "Late March, perhaps early April." Emily nodded, calculations already made in her own mind. "If the weather improves by then, I could travel to Durango. Afterward, find work, perhaps. I'm good with numbers, with managing inventory. Some merchant might hire me." "A woman alone with a newborn child?" Makia's skepticism was evident. "The same people who turned you away before will not suddenly become generous." His bluntness stung, but Emily couldn't dispute the truth of it. Respectable positions were hard enough for women to secure. For a single mother, the options narrowed considerably. She might find work as a laundress or cleaning woman, but such jobs paid barely enough for a single person to survive, let alone a woman with an infant. "Then what would you suggest?" she asked, unable to keep a hint of defensiveness from her voice. "I suggest you worry about surviving the winter and bringing your child safely into the world first," Makia replied pragmatically. "The future will reveal its path when the time comes." It was both frustratingly vague and undeniably wise. Emily nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the sense in his words. Planning too far ahead had always been her downfall, seeing the imagined future so clearly that she missed the warnings in the present. It was how she had ended up married to Thomas, despite her father's concerns, how she had agreed to leave Pennsylvania for the promise of Colorado silver, despite her mother's tears. Perhaps living day by day, as Makia seemed to, had its merits. As January gave way to February, the worst of the winter began to ease. Snow still covered the ground, but the days grew marginally longer, the sun slightly stronger. On clear days, Makia began taking Emily on short walks outside the hogan, building her stamina, showing her the hidden landscape beneath the snow. Emily's pregnancy advanced, her body preparing for the coming birth. Her damaged fingers and toes had healed remarkably well under Makia's care. She had lost the tips of 2 toes and 1 finger to frostbite, but had regained full movement and sensation in the rest, a result far better than she had initially feared. Makia's health, however, seemed to deteriorate even as hers improved. His coughing fits became more frequent, often leaving him winded and weak. There were mornings when he could barely rise from his sleeping mat, though he would never admit to the severity of his condition. Emily took on more responsibilities without comment, allowing him the dignity of not acknowledging his growing frailty. One morning in late February, as Emily returned from gathering water at a nearby spring that Makia had shown her, she heard voices coming from the direction of the hogan. Male voices, speaking a language she didn't understand, rapid and sharp. Fear clutched at her heart. Instinctively, she moved behind a large pine tree, setting down her water bucket. Peering around the trunk, she saw 3 men on horseback near the hogan's entrance. 2 were younger, perhaps in their 20s, dressed in a mixture of traditional and white man's clothing. The third, clearly older and in a position of authority, sat straight-backed on his horse, his face bearing a striking resemblance to Makia's, though without the weathering of years spent in the elements. Talon. It could only be Makia's brother. As Emily watched, Makia emerged from the hogan, standing tall, despite the illness that she knew plagued him. The brothers faced each other, neither giving ground, the tension between them palpable, even from a distance. Words were exchanged, too far away for Emily to hear clearly, but the tone was unmistakable. Accusation, defense, long-held grievances rekindled. Suddenly, Talon's gaze shifted, looking past his brother toward the dwelling. He said something that made Makia stiffen. One of the younger men dismounted, moving toward the hogan's entrance. Emily realized with a jolt what was happening. They had found evidence of her presence, the mended clothing perhaps, or the small feminine touches she had added to the dwelling's organization. They knew Makia wasn't alone. Without stopping to think through the consequences, Emily stepped out from behind the tree. "Hello," she called, forcing brightness into her voice. "I'm coming back with water." All 4 men turned toward her, expressions ranging from shock to suspicion. Emily approached steadily, one hand supporting her heavily pregnant belly, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Makia's face revealed nothing, but she could read the tension in his shoulders. This was not how he would have chosen for this meeting to unfold. As she drew closer, Talon's eyes narrowed, taking in her condition, the obvious pregnancy, the remnants of frostbite visible on her exposed hand. "What is this?" he demanded in English, clearly intending her to understand. "You keep a white woman here?" Emily stepped forward, setting down her water bucket. "Chief Makia saved my life. I was abandoned, dying in the snow when he found me." She straightened, meeting Talon's gaze directly. "I owe him everything." Talon's lip curled slightly. "And now you live together alone in this place?" The implication was clear, and it brought a hot flush of indignation to Emily's cheeks. "He has been nothing but honorable," she said firmly. "He has treated my injuries, taught me to survive, and asked nothing in return except help with tasks his illness makes difficult." At the mention of illness, something flashed across Talon's face, concern quickly masked by renewed suspicion. "Illness? What illness?" Makia shot Emily a warning. Look, but it was too late. The words had already escaped her. "Consumption," she said, regretting her loose tongue immediately. "But he uses his medicines to treat it." Talon dismounted in a fluid motion, approaching his brother with scrutinizing eyes. Now that they stood face to face, the family resemblance was unmistakable, though Talon lacked the wisdom that experience had etched into Makia's features. The brothers spoke rapidly in their native tongue, the conversation growing heated. Emily could understand nothing of the words, but the meaning was clear enough. Talon was angry, demanding something. Makia was refusing, his normally calm demeanor fraying under his brother's persistence. Finally, Makia switched to English, perhaps intentionally including Emily. "I will not return. My place is here." "Your place is with your people," Talon responded, frustration evident, "especially now when you are ill. The tribal council asks for your wisdom. The young men need your guidance on the old ways." "The same old ways you were so quick to abandon?" Makia's voice held an edge Emily had never heard before. "Times change. We adapt, but we need balance between old and new." Talon glanced at Emily. "Though I see you have found your own new ways." The insinuation brought Makia's hand to the knife at his belt, a gesture that caused the two younger men to step forward protectively. "You dishonor yourself with such thoughts," Makia said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This woman deserves respect, not your crude implications." Tension crackled between the brothers like static before a lightning strike. Emily felt the baby shift within her, responding to her anxiety. She placed a hand protectively over her belly, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Talon. His expression shifted subtly, some of the hostility fading. "When is the child due?" "When the wildflowers bloom," Emily answered, using Makia's earlier prediction. Talon nodded thoughtfully. "And after? What then?" It was the question Emily had been asking herself for weeks, still without a clear answer. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "I have no family, no home to return to." "So you will stay here indefinitely?" Talon's gaze shifted between her and his brother. "Living as what? Servant? Patient? Something else?" "That is not your concern," Makia interjected firmly. "It becomes my concern when it affects the safety of our people," Talon countered. "A white woman living with a Navajo man, alone in the mountains. When this becomes known, and it will, there will be consequences. White men with guns will come looking. They will not care if the arrangement is innocent." The brutal truth of his words settled heavily in the clearing. Emily had been so focused on immediate survival that she hadn't fully considered the implications of her presence in Makia's life beyond the winter. Talon was right. In the world outside their small hogan, such an arrangement would be viewed with suspicion at best, violence at worst. "Then what would you have me do?" Makia asked, the fight seeming to leave him. "Leave her to die? Send her away in her condition?" Talon was silent for a long moment, studying his brother with new eyes, perhaps seeing the illness more clearly now that it had been named. "No," he finally said. "That would not be our way." He straightened his shoulders, coming to a decision. "She will come with us to the reservation until the child is born. Our healers can help with the birth. You will come too, to recover your strength." It was not a request, but a pronouncement. "And after the birth?" Emily asked, finding her voice. "After?" Talon shrugged slightly. "That is for the council to decide. But no child should come into the world without women to assist the mother, and no man should face illness alone when his family can aid him." The silence that followed Talon's pronouncement stretched taut as a bowstring. Emily glanced at Makia, trying to gauge his reaction to his brother's unexpected offer. The chief's face remained impassive, but something in his posture had changed, a subtle relaxing of his shoulders, as though a burden had been partially lifted. "The reservation is 3 days' journey," Makia finally said, his voice measured. "Emily is in no condition to ride that far." Talon considered this, his eyes assessing Emily's advanced pregnancy. "We have a travois. It can be made comfortable. Enough." Emily found herself both touched and irritated by being discussed as though she weren't present. "I should have some say in this decision," she interjected, drawing surprised looks from all 4 men. "I'm grateful for the offer, truly, but I've only just regained my strength. The idea of leaving this shelter, especially given..." She gestured vaguely at her swollen belly, "makes me uneasy." "A woman near her time should be with other women," Talon said firmly, as though this settled the matter. "It is not proper, not safe, for you to birth a child here with only my brother to assist." Emily couldn't argue with the logic, even as apprehension tightened her chest. The prospect of childbirth had been weighing increasingly on her mind as her due date approached. Having experienced women to help would certainly improve her chances, and her child's. "When would we leave?" she asked, implicitly accepting the inevitability of the journey. "Tomorrow at first light," Talon replied. "We have supplies enough. The weather holds fair for now, but that could change." Makia had remained silent during this exchange. A series of coughs he was clearly trying to suppress, making his shoulders shake. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "I will not be ordered about like a child, brother. If we go, it will be on my terms." Talon's expression hardened. "And what terms would those be?" "Emily travels only as far as she wishes each day. We stop when she needs rest, not when you decide we've made sufficient progress." Makia straightened to his full height, which matched his younger brother's despite his illness. "And most importantly, no one, not you, not the council, not the Indian agent, decides her fate or her child's without her consent." The 2 brothers locked eyes in silent combat. Years of rivalry and fundamentally different worldviews crystallized in a single moment. Emily held her breath, one hand instinctively covering her belly in a protective gesture. Finally, Talon gave a curt nod. "Agreed, but we leave tomorrow. I'll send Kayla back with the travois and additional blankets before nightfall." He gestured to one of the younger men, who nodded and immediately mounted his horse. "We'll be ready," Makia said, the matter settled. As Talon and his remaining companion rode away, Emily turned to Makia, questions bubbling to her lips. "Do you truly wish to go? This is your home. I would never want to force you from it." Makia watched his brother's retreating figure for a long moment before answering. "What I wish matters little now. Talon is right about one thing. You need women to help with the birth, and perhaps..." He paused, a rare uncertainty crossing his features. "Perhaps it is time I stopped hiding in these mountains, using tradition as an excuse for pride." Emily had never heard him speak so candidly about his self-imposed exile. Your traditions aren't excuses, she said softly. They're your identity, your history. Yes, Makia acknowledged, but tradition that cannot bend eventually breaks. I have been so focused on preserving the old ways that I forgot why we preserve them to sustain life, to guide future generations. He gestured toward her belly. Like the child you carry, the future requires both roots and new growth. His words struck Emily with unexpected force. She had been so consumed with immediate survival, first her desperate flight from Silverton, then her recovery in Makia's care, that she had given little thought to what kind of life she wanted for her child, beyond simply ensuring it had one. "What will they think of me?" she asked, the question emerging unbidden. "Your people, will they accept a white woman among them?" Makia's expression softened slightly. "There will be curiosity, perhaps some suspicion, but you come not as a conqueror or missionary, but as someone who needed help and received it. That will count for much." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Besides, they will be too busy marveling at my return to pay you much mind at first." The rest of the day passed in efficient preparation. Emily gathered what few personal possessions she had. Her Bible, a small mirror Thomas had given her in happier days, the mended clothing Makia had provided. Makia methodically packed his medicines, wrapped his ceremonial items in protective hides, and selected which weapons to bring. By evening, Kayla had returned with the promised travois and additional supplies. The young warrior worked silently, helping Makia secure the hogan for their absence, reinforcing the simple structure against potential winter storms. Emily noticed how the younger man deferred to Makia despite his exile status, suggesting the chief's influence had never truly waned among certain segments of the tribe. That night, as they ate a simple meal beside what might be their last shared fire in this place, Emily found herself uncharacteristically reluctant to sleep. The hogan, once strange and foreign, had become a sanctuary. The thought of leaving, its protection filled her with both anticipation and dread. "Will you return here?" she asked Makia, watching him carefully pack his pipe with a mixture of herbs she now recognized as both medicinal and ceremonial. Makia struck a match, the small flame illuminating the deep lines of his face. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it is time for new beginnings." He inhaled deeply, the ember glowing brighter, then exhaled a stream of fragrant smoke toward the ceiling vent. One cannot know the path until one begins walking it. Emily smiled despite her anxiety. "You have an answer for everything, don't you?" "Not answers," Makia corrected, "just observations from a longer life than yours." He offered her the pipe, which surprised her. He had never done so before. "I don't smoke," she said, somewhat awkwardly. "This is not smoking as your people know it. This is prayer, meditation, preparation for a journey." When she still hesitated, he added, "It will not harm the child. Women of my tribe use these herbs throughout pregnancy to strengthen both mother and baby." Cautiously, Emily accepted the pipe, following Makia's instructions to take just a small breath and hold it briefly before exhaling. The smoke was less harsh than she expected, with undertones of mint and something earthy she couldn't identify. A pleasant warmth spread through her chest, easing the tension that had built there throughout the day. "Thank you," she said, returning the pipe, "for everything, for my life, for my child's life, for your patience and wisdom." Words seemed inadequate for the debt she owed this man, yet they were all she had to offer. Makia acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod. "The greatest thanks will be to see you and the child thrive. That is payment enough for any healer." They lapsed into comfortable silence after that, each lost in private thoughts as the fire gradually died down to embers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new faces, new judgments to navigate. But for tonight, they remained in the quiet sanctuary they had created together, a temporary family bound by circumstance and unexpected connection. Dawn arrived with a clarity that spoke of continuing fair weather. the sunlight glinting off snow-covered branches like scattered diamonds. Emily emerged from the hogan to find Makia already loading their belongings onto the travois, his movements deliberate despite the occasional cough that racked his frame. Talon and his companion arrived as promised, just as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. After a brief consultation with Makia in their native tongue, they began final preparations for departure. The travois was attached to one of the horses, a sturdy mare with a placid temperament, and padded with additional furs and blankets to make it as comfortable as possible for Emily. "It will not be an easy journey," Talon warned her as he helped her settle onto the makeshift conveyance. "But we will take care to avoid the roughest terrain." Emily nodded, adjusting her position to accommodate her rounded belly. The travois, essentially a triangular frame with a basket-like center, was surprisingly well designed, distributing her weight evenly and providing better support than she had anticipated. With a minimum of ceremony, they set off, Talon and his young companion leading the way on horseback, Makia walking beside Emily's travois, and Kayla bringing up the rear, leading a pack horse loaded with their combined belongings. Emily found herself watching Makia closely, concerned about his ability to maintain the pace given his illness, but he moved with the practiced efficiency of someone long accustomed to conserving energy, his steps measured and deliberate. The first day's travel proved less arduous than Emily had feared. The weather remained favorable, with weak winter sunshine and little wind. Talon set a moderate pace, occasionally glancing back to ensure Makia and Emily were managing. They stopped frequently, ostensibly for Emily's benefit, though she suspected it was as much to allow Makia rest without wounding his pride. During one such stop, as Emily stretched her legs beside a small stream, Kayla approached her with a water skin. The young warrior had spoken little since their departure, but his dark eyes had observed her with quiet curiosity. "Thank you," she said, accepting the water gratefully. Kayla nodded, then surprised her by speaking in careful, accented English. "You are strong for a white woman." Emily wasn't sure whether to be amused or offended by the qualification. "I'm not sure how strong I am," she replied honestly, "but circumstances haven't left me much choice." A ghost of a smile crossed Kayla's serious face. "That is true strength, to continue when choice is removed." He glanced toward where Makia sat resting on a fallen log. "The chief taught me this when I was a boy. He said anyone can be brave when the path is clear, but true courage emerges when fog descends and the way forward is hidden." The insight into Makia's teaching touched Emily unexpectedly. "He's a wise man." "The wisest," Kaylee agreed without hesitation. "Many of us younger men visited him in secret, even after he left the reservation. His brother's ways have merit. We must adapt to survive. But Makia's knowledge is the foundation upon which any adaptation must be built." Emily studied the young man with new interest. "You don't see the brother's views as irreconcilable, then?" Kaylee considered this, his expression thoughtful. "A bird needs two wings to fly. If one wing believes it is more important and refuses to work with the other, the bird can only circle aimlessly until it falls." He shrugged slightly. "But I am just a warrior, not a philosopher." Before Emily could respond, Talon called for them to continue. As Kel helped her back onto the travois, she found herself mulling over his words. Perhaps there was wisdom in this younger generation that both brothers had overlooked in their ideological struggle. By evening, they had covered approximately 10 miles, a respectable distance given the conditions and company. They made camp in a sheltered hollow where wind-twisted pines provided natural windbreaks. The men worked with practiced efficiency, erecting a small hide tent for Emily's privacy, building a fire, and preparing a simple but nourishing meal of dried meat reconstituted in a stew with wild onions and preserved berries. Emily watched their coordinated efforts with appreciation, particularly noting how Talon subtly arranged tasks to give Makia those requiring less physical exertion without explicitly acknowledging his brother's weakened condition. There was care there, beneath the stern exterior and ideological differences. After the meal, as they sat around the fire, Talon surprised Emily by addressing her directly. "My brother tells me you worked in your father's trading post before your marriage." Emily nodded, somewhat startled by this personal query. "Yes, in Pennsylvania. I managed the books and helped with inventory." "You can read, write, and calculate then?" It wasn't a question, but Emily answered anyway. "Yes, my father believed daughters should be educated as well as sons." Talon exchanged a glance with Makia that Emily couldn't interpret. "Interesting," was all he said, before changing the subject to discuss the next day's route with Kayleigh. Later, as Emily settled into her tent, Makia stopped by briefly to check on her comfort and provide a small packet of herbs to steep in hot water. "For sleep and to ease any discomfort from the day's travel," he explained. "Your brother asked about my education," Emily said, curiosity getting the better of her. Why would that interest him? Makia's expression revealed nothing. Talon's mind always works on multiple levels. Perhaps he simply sought to know you better. Emily wasn't convinced. There was more to it than that. "What aren't you telling me?" A rare smile crossed Makia's weathered face. "You have become perceptive in our time together, Emily Collins." He sighed, settling on his haunches beside her bedding. "The reservation has been allocated a school. The Indian agent insists our children attend to learn the white man's ways. Talon sees value in this, reading, writing, numbers, but fears they will lose our language, our stories, our identity in the process." Understanding dawned. He's wondering if someone could teach the practical skills without erasing your culture. Makia nodded. "Such ideas have been discussed. A teacher who respects both worlds would be valuable." The implication hung in the air between them. Emily felt a flutter of something like hope, quickly tempered by realism. "I'm hardly qualified to teach, and I'll have an infant to care for." "These are considerations, yes," Makia acknowledged, "but paths reveal themselves one step at a time. Remember." After he left, Emily lay awake despite the soothing herbs, her mind racing with possibilities she had never contemplated. A teacher, not a laundress or cleaning woman or reluctant wife, but someone with knowledge to share. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. The child moved within her, a series of purposeful kicks that made her smile despite her exhaustion. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered, hands cradling her belly. "Shall we become teachers together?" The journey continued for 2 more days, each following a similar pattern. They would break camp at dawn, travel until Emily or Makia needed rest, though it was never explicitly framed as the latter, continue until dusk, then establish a new camp. The weather remained mercifully clear, though the temperature dropped sharply each night, requiring careful maintenance of the fire and judicious use of their blankets and furs. Emily found herself growing more comfortable with her Navajo companions. Kayleigh, having broken his initial silence, proved to be quite talkative, eager to practice his English and learn about the world beyond the reservation. Even Talon gradually unbent, his stern demeanor softening slightly as he observed Emily's genuine interest in their customs and language. Makia, however, worried her increasingly. His cough worsened with each day of travel, becoming more frequent and productive. On the 3rd morning, she noticed bright spots of blood on the handkerchief he quickly tucked away, and his complexion had taken on an alarming grayish undertone beneath his natural coloring. When they stopped at midday, Emily managed to speak with him privately while the others prepared a small meal. "You're getting worse," she said without preamble. "This journey is too much for you." Makia didn't bother denying it. "Perhaps, but it is necessary." Nothing is worth risking your life, Emily insisted, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. Something softened in Makia's dark eyes. There are many things worth such risk, Emily Collins. My people, my brother, though he infuriates me, the knowledge I must pass on before I join my ancestors. He glanced meaningfully at her belly. The future generation. These are all worth whatever discomfort I endure. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. I don't want to lose you, she admitted, the words emerging before she could censure them. After everyone else has abandoned me, you've become important. Makia reached out, briefly touching her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that from him spoke volumes. I am not so easily defeated, even by this sickness, and soon you will have many to rely upon, not just one old stubborn chief. Before Emily could respond, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and double over. Makia's hand tightened on her shoulder, steadying her. The child? Emily nodded, breathing through the contraction. Just practice pains, I think. I've had them before. But even as she spoke, another wave came, stronger than the first. Makia's expression grew concerned. How often have these pains come today? They started this morning, Emily admitted. But they were mild, far apart. I didn't think... Another contraction cut off her words, this one intense enough to make her knees buckle. Makia called sharply to Talon, who came running, alarm evident on his face when he saw Emily's condition. The brothers conferred rapidly in their language, while Kayla hovered nearby, clearly unsure how to help. We must make proper camp, Talon finally said. The child comes early. Fear gripped Emily's heart. It's too soon, she protested, though her body seemed determined to prove her wrong as another contraction seized her. The wildflowers haven't bloomed yet. Makia's steady gaze met hers. Some flowers bloom ahead of their season, Emily. This child has its own timing. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and preparation. The men worked quickly to establish a more substantial camp than their previous overnight stops, constructing a low dome-shaped shelter using flexible branches, covered with hides and blankets. Inside, they created a comfortable berthing space with the softest furs and blankets they possessed. Talon sent Kayla riding ahead to the reservation with urgent instructions. Bring back the midwives, Emily heard him direct. Tell them to bring all necessary medicines and supplies. Ride without stopping. As her labor progressed, Emily found herself increasingly grateful for Makia's calm presence. While Talon maintained the fire and heated water, Makia stayed by her side, offering herbs to ease the pain and gentle guidance on breathing and positioning. His healer's knowledge, while not specific to childbirth, provided considerable comfort in the absence of female attendants. I'm scared, Emily confessed during a brief respite between contractions. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't do this? Women have brought life into the world since the beginning of time, Makia reminded her. Your body knows what to do, even if your mind harbors doubts. But many women die in childbirth, Emily countered, giving voice to her deepest fear. And here, with no proper midwife, you will not die, Makia stated with such certainty that Emily almost believed him. This child needs you, and you have survived too much already to falter now. Another contraction interrupted their conversation, more powerful than any preceding it. Emily gripped Makia's hand with crushing force, beyond caring about propriety or strength. When it passed, she lay back exhausted, sweat dampening her hair despite the cool air. The pains come faster now, Makia observed. The child grows impatient to meet its mother. Outside, they heard the approach of horses, multiple riders moving at speed. Talon ducked into the shelter, his expression revealing cautious relief. The midwives come, and my wife with them. Emily had not known Talon was married, though it shouldn't have surprised her given his age and status. The knowledge that experienced women would soon take over her care brought a wave of gratitude so intense it momentarily overshadowed her pain. Within minutes, the shelter filled with activity as 3 women entered, immediately taking charge with quiet efficiency. The oldest, a gray-haired woman with deep lines etched into her face, gently but firmly displaced Makya from his position beside Emily. "You have done well, brother," she said in accented but clear English, obviously for Emily's benefit. "Now, this becomes women's work." Makya nodded, seemingly relieved rather than offended by the dismissal. He placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder one last time. "You are in good hands now. Nizhoni is the tribe's most respected midwife." As he left, the youngest of the women, who Emily later learned was Talon's wife, Laerty, took his place, offering a reassuring smile. "Your child has chosen an adventurous entry into this world," she said, helping Emily shift into a more comfortable position as another contraction began building. "But we will ensure both of you emerge safely from the journey." The next several hours tested Emily's endurance beyond anything she had previously experienced. The contractions intensified until they seemed to consume her entire being, leaving no room for thought or fear, only the primal work of bringing forth life. The women supported her tirelessly, Nizhoni directing the process with authoritative calm, Laerty offering physical support and encouragement, and the third woman, whose name Emily never quite caught through her haze of pain, preparing herbs and warm compresses. They spoke to her sometimes in English, sometimes in their own language, but the tone conveyed what words could not: strength, support, the ancient solidarity of women engaged in the most fundamental act of creation. Outside, night fell. Through the thin walls of the shelter, Emily was vaguely aware of the men maintaining the fire, their low voices occasionally audible between her increasingly vocal responses to the pain. "The head emerges," Nizhoni announced finally, after what seemed like eternity. "One more push, Emily Collins, and you will meet your child." Summoning strength she hadn't known she possessed, Emily bore down with all her remaining energy. The sensation of release when it came was both excruciating and transcendent, a tearing, burning moment of surrender, followed by profound emptiness as the small body slipped from hers into Nizhoni's waiting hands. For one terrifying heartbeat, silence reigned. Then came the most beautiful sound Emily had ever heard, a fierce, indignant cry announcing her child's arrival with unmistakable determination to be heard. "A daughter," Nizhoni proclaimed, placing the squirming, bloody newborn on Emily's chest. "Strong lungs, good color, she will thrive." Tears blurred Emily's vision as she gazed down at the tiny, perfect face, wispy dark hair, skin still mottled. From birth but clearly light brown, a beautiful blend of Emily's fairness and Thomas's darker complexion. The baby's eyes, when they briefly fluttered open, were the deep, unfocused blue of all newborns. "Hello, little one," Emily whispered, overcome with a love so fierce it felt almost violent in its intensity. "Welcome to the world," Laerty smiled, wiping Emily's forehead with a cool cloth. "She is beautiful. Have you chosen a name?" Emily hadn't given much thought to names, the pregnancy itself having consumed most of her attention. Looking at her daughter now, though, one name seemed inescapable. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope." Outside the shelter, she heard Makya's distinctive cough, followed by murmured conversation, as Nizhoni presumably shared news of the successful birth. A weight Emily hadn't realized she was carrying lifted from her heart. Despite everything, abandonment, near-death dislocation, this child had found her way safely into the world, surrounded not by formal medical care or family connections, but by something perhaps more valuable, genuine human compassion that transcended cultural boundaries. As the women helped clean her and the baby, changing the birthing blankets for fresh ones, and guiding Hope to nurse for the first time, Emily found herself pondering the strange path that had led her here. Thomas's betrayal, once a devastation, now seemed almost a gift, forcing her from a false security into genuine connection with people who valued loyalty and community above all. "Rest now," Nijoni instructed, arranging blankets around mother and child. "Tomorrow will bring many new challenges. Tonight is for recovery and bonding." Exhausted beyond measure, Emily needed no further encouragement. With hope nestled securely against her chest, she surrendered to sleep, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. No longer alone in a hostile world, but surrounded by unexpected allies and newfound strength. The eastern sky had just begun to lighten when Emily awoke to hope's hungry cries. The birth attendants had departed the shelter at some point during the night, leaving mother and child privacy for their first hours together. As Emily helped her daughter latch onto nurse, the shelter flap rustled slightly. "May I enter?" Makia's voice came softly from outside. "Yes," Emily called, adjusting a blanket for modesty, though the nursing child left little to cover. Makia ducked through the entrance, his tall frame seeming too large for the intimate space. In the dim pre-dawn light, Emily could see the toll the journey and night's vigil had taken on him, the shadows beneath his eyes darker, his cheekbones more prominent than ever. Yet his expression, as he gazed upon hope, held a tranquility Emily had never witnessed from him before. "She is perfect," he said simply. "Would you like to hold her?" And Emily offered, surprising herself. "Once she finishes eating." Makia hesitated, then nodded, settling cross-legged near the entrance while he waited. "The women say you did well, that your strength impressed even Nijoni, who is not easily impressed." Emily smiled tiredly. "I'm not sure it was strength, so much as lack of alternatives." "That is often when true strength emerges," Makia observed, echoing Kayleigh's earlier sentiment. "When the easy paths are closed to us." Hope finished nursing with a contented sigh, tiny eyes already drooping towards sleep again. Emily carefully adjusted her clothing, then held out the swaddled infant. "Support her head," she instructed. Automatically, though Makia hardly needed the guidance, his large hands cradled the newborn with surprising gentleness, as though he had held many infants before. "Hello, small one," he murmured, studying Hope's features with evident wonder. "You have chosen an auspicious day to join us. The sun returns to strength, and the first green shoots push through the snow." Emily hadn't realized the significance of the date, having lost track of time during their journey. "The spring equinox," Makia nodded. "A powerful day for new beginnings." His gaze shifted from the baby to Emily. "You have named her Hope, a good name with meaning." "It seemed fitting," Emily said, "after everything. She represents a new start, a reason to believe in tomorrow." Makia rocked the sleeping infant gently. "In our tradition, children sometimes receive a second name, one that honors their spirit or circumstances of birth." He seemed hesitant, as though unsure whether to continue. "What would you call her?" Emily asked, genuinely curious. "Ahiga," Makia said softly. "It means she fights, because she, like her mother, has fought to survive against difficult odds." Emotion welled in Emily's throat. "Hope Ahiga Collins," she tested the combination. "It's beautiful, thank you." Makia inclined his head in acknowledgement, then carefully returned the baby to Emily's arms. "The reservation is still a day's journey from here. Talon suggests we remain camped today to allow you and the child rest, then continue tomorrow if you feel strong enough." "And if I don't?" "Then we wait another day," Makia said simply. "The tribe has waited 3 years for my return. They can wait 3 days more." Emily smiled at his dry humor. "What happens when we reach the reservation? Where will we stay?" "With my brother's family at first," Makia answered. "Later, we will see." Much depends on the council's reception, the Indian agent's disposition, how quickly you regain your strength. He paused, then added, and whether certain ideas Talon has mentioned find favor. You mean the teaching position, Emily deduced. Makia nodded. Among other possibilities. Your arrival with me, and now the birth of your daughter on a sacred day, these will be seen as significant by many in the tribe. Signs and portents matter greatly to my people. And to the Indian agent? Will he see signs and portents, or just a problematic white woman with a newborn? Makia's expression grew more serious. That remains to be seen. But you have powerful advocates now. Myself, Talon, and most importantly, Nijoni, whose opinion carries weight even with white authorities due to her success in reducing childbed fever at the reservation. Hope stirred in Emily's arms, tiny, features scrunching momentarily before relaxing back into sleep. Looking down at her daughter's peaceful face, Emily felt a surge of fierce protectiveness, coupled with a new determination. Whatever comes, she said quietly, we'll face it. After all, she fights, and so do I. Makia smiled, the rare expression transforming his severe features. Yes, he agreed. You most certainly do. The reservation sprawled across the valley. Floor, a collection of hogans, wooden structures, and canvas tents, arranged in a pattern that made sense only to those who lived there. As their small party crested the final ridge, Emily felt hope stir against her chest, as though the infant somehow sensed they had reached their destination. The journey had taken 2 additional days rather than 1. Emily's recovery from childbirth, necessitating a slower pace than Talon had initially planned. Now, gazing down at the settlement below, Emily was struck by a mixture of relief and trepidation. Relief that the physically demanding trek was over, trepidation about what awaited them among Makia's people. Would they welcome a white woman and her newborn, or would they see her as an unwelcome intrusion, a complication in an already precarious existence? Beside her, Makia sat straighter on his horse, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts about returning to the community. He had left 3 years earlier. His illness had worsened during their travel, the coughing fits more frequent, the blood-flecked handkerchief no longer hidden but kept ready in his sleeve. Yet his dignity remained undiminished, his presence commanding respect even in his weakened state. They have seen us, Talon said, pointing to movement in the camp below. Word spreads quickly. Indeed, figures were already emerging from dwellings, gathering in small clusters, pointing up toward the ridge where the travelers stood, silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Even from this distance, Emily could sense the curiosity, perhaps confusion, that their arrival generated. "Are you ready?" Makia asked her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Emily adjusted Hope's blanket, ensuring the baby was protected from the brisk spring air. "Does it matter if I'm not?" A ghost of a smile touched Makia's lips. "You could always turn back toward the mountains. With a 4-day-old infant, I think not." Emily straightened her shoulders as best she could, while seated in the modified travois. "Besides, I've never been one to run from a challenge." "No," Makia agreed. "You certainly have not." Talon signaled for them to continue, and their small procession began the descent into the valley. As they approached the outskirts of the settlement, Emily became aware of the silence that had fallen. Hundreds of eyes watched their approach, men, women, children standing in solemn observation, their expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness to what might have been hope. An elderly man stepped forward from the gathered crowd, his deeply lined face bearing the weight of authority. He wore a mixture of traditional Navajo clothing and items clearly obtained through trade with white settlers, a visual representation of the middle path Talon had described. When he spoke, it was in the Navajo language, his voice carrying across the suddenly still afternoon. Makia replied in kind, his tone respectful but firm. Though Emily couldn't understand the words, she recognized the cadence of formal greeting, of position being established and acknowledged. Talon dismounted, approaching the elder with a brief bow of his head. "My father welcomes the return of his eldest son," he translated for Emily's benefit. "He asks what brings Makia back to the people after so long an absence." All eyes turned to Makia, who dismounted with difficulty, visibly steadying himself, before addressing the gathered tribe. Again he spoke in Navajo, occasionally gesturing toward Emily and Hope. The crowd's reaction shifted as he spoke, murmurs rippling through the assembly, gazes moving between the chief and the white woman. With her infant, when Makia finished, silence fell once more. The elder, Talon, and Makia's father, Emily now realized, studied her with penetrating eyes that missed nothing. Her pallor from recent childbirth, the protective way she held Hope, the obvious respect she showed toward Makia. Finally, he spoke. Again, this time in halting but clear English. "My son says you were abandoned to die, that he found you in the snow and offered shelter, that your child was born under his protection with the assistance of our midwives." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Is this true?" "Yes," Emily replied, her voice carrying more strength than she felt. "Chief Makia saved my life and my daughter's. I owe him a debt I can never repay." The elder nodded slowly. "And what do you seek from us now?" It was a fair question, one Emily had pondered throughout their journey. What did she want? Safety, certainly, a place to raise Hope away from prejudice and abandonment, but something else too. Purpose, connection, the chance to build something meaningful from the ruins of her former life. "Shelter for now," she answered honestly. "A chance to recover my strength and care for my child. Beyond that, she hesitated, unsure how much to reveal of her conversations with Makia and Talon. "Beyond that, I hope to find a way to be useful, to give something back for what has been given to me." The elder considered her words, then turned to speak privately with several other tribal members who had gathered close, men and women whose clothing or bearing suggested positions of importance. Their discussion was brief, but appeared intense, with occasional glances toward Emily and more frequently toward Makia. Finally, the elder turned back. "You and your child may stay in Talon's dwelling until you have recovered. After that, the council will decide what is best." His eyes shifted to Makia. "My son will be welcomed in my home, where he belongs. Tonight, we will feast to celebrate his return and the birth of the child." Relief washed through Emily like a physical force. They would not be turned away. For now, at least, she and Hope had sanctuary. As the crowd began to disperse, women approached Emily, Nijoni among them, her weathered face breaking into a rare smile at the sight of Hope. "Come," she said, helping Emily down from the travois. "You need rest, food, proper tending after the journey." Emily looked for Makia, wanting to thank him once more before they were separated, but he was already surrounded by a group of elders, his father's hand resting on his shoulder in what appeared to be a gesture of reconciliation. Their eyes met, briefly across the distance, and Makia gave her a slight nod, acknowledgement, reassurance, perhaps even farewell. Then, Nijoni and the other women were guiding her away toward a large hogan near the center of the settlement. Talon's dwelling proved more substantial than Makia's mountain home. A traditional hogan, but larger, with additional comforts that spoke of his position in the tribe and perhaps his greater willingness to adopt certain aspects of white settlements. His wife, Laity, welcomed Emily with genuine warmth, quickly establishing a comfortable space near the fire where she could rest with Hope. "You must be exhausted," Laity said, bringing a cup of herbal tea that Emily recognized as one of Makia's. "Healing preparations. The journey is difficult enough without having just given birth." "I'm stronger than I look," Emily replied, gratefully accepting the tea. "But yes, rest sounds wonderful." Laity smiled, gesturing to a curtained alcove where bedding had been. "You're prepared? Sleep then. I'll watch over the little one when she wakes hungry." Emily was too tired to protest, though the thought of being separated from Hope, even briefly, caused a pang of anxiety. She settled onto the surprisingly comfortable bedding. Hope nestled securely beside her and surrendered to exhaustion. She awoke to unfamiliar sounds, voices speaking in Navajo, the rhythmic scrape of something being ground in a mortar, the laughter of children playing nearby. Momentary disorientation gave way to remembrance as she felt Hope's small form still, curled against her side. The baby slept peacefully, tiny hands curled into fists beside her face. "You're awake!" Laity appeared at the entrance to the alcove, a fresh dress draped over her arm. "Good. The feast preparations are underway, and you'll want time to wash and change." Emily sat up carefully, mindful of her still tender body. "Feast? To celebrate Makya's return and your daughter's birth," Laity explained, laying out the dress, a simple but well-made garment in the style favored by white women in the territory, though clearly not new. "This was mine when I first came to the reservation. The Indian agent's wife gave it to me. It should fit well enough for tonight." "You weren't born to the tribe?" Emily asked, surprised. Laity's expression grew more reserved. "I was Ute, originally. Orphaned during a smallpox outbreak, raised by Catholic missionaries until I was 16. Talon met me when he came to trade with the mission." A small smile touched her lips at the memory. He was persistent. The missionaries were scandalized. This glimpse into Laity's past created an immediate bond of understanding between the women. Laity, too, had navigated the space between worlds, had found her place among people not born her own. "How did the tribe accept you?" Emily asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind since their arrival. "Slowly," Laity admitted. "Some faster than others. Makya was among the first to welcome me openly, despite his traditional views." She helped Emily stand, supporting her as she found her balance. "Come. The washing area is private. I'll hold the little one." It felt strange to surrender Hope to another's arms, but Laity handled the infant with practiced ease that inspired confidence. The baby barely stirred during the transfer, content in her milk-sated sleep. The washing area proved to be a screened enclosure beside a small stream that ran along the settlement's edge. The water was cold but invigorating, and the soap Laity provided had a pleasant herbal scent that reminded Emily of Makya's medicines. As she carefully cleaned away the grime of travel and the lingering evidence of childbirth, Emily found herself wondering about the chief. Had his return been truly welcomed? Was he receiving proper care for his illness? When she returned to Talon's dwelling, freshly washed and dressed in the borrowed gown, she found Nijoni had arrived bearing a small clay pot of salve. "For healing," the midwife explained, gesturing to Emily's still tender birth areas. "Apply morning and night. Prevents infection, speeds recovery." "Thank you," Emily said, genuinely touched by these continued kindnesses from women who had every reason to view her with suspicion. "How is Makya? His cough seemed worse during our journey." Nijoni's expression grew solemn. "The sickness has deep roots now. I have given him stronger medicines, but..." She shook her head slightly. "He should have come sooner." Fear clutched at Emily's heart. "Will he recover?" "That is for the spirits to decide," Nijoni replied. "But Makya has always been stubborn. Perhaps he will surprise us all." She glanced at Hope, who had awakened and was being changed by Laity. "The child brings him joy. I have not seen him smile so much in many years." Before Emily could respond, drums began sounding from the center of the settlement, deep rhythmic beats that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. "The feast begins," Laity announced, wrapping Hope in a beautifully embroidered blanket. Emily hadn't seen before, This is a special night, the first time in 3 years all the family is together. The central clearing had been transformed during Emily's rest. A massive fire blazed at its heart, surrounded by logs and stones arranged as seating. Beyond this inner circle, tables laden with food stretched in a rough semicircle, tended by women who added dishes even as people began to gather. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, with anticipation of something significant. Leotie guided Emily to a place of honor near the fire, where Talon already sat with his father and other tribal elders. Makya was not yet present, and Emily found herself scanning the growing crowd for his familiar figure. "He comes separately," Talon explained, noting her searching gaze. "There are ceremonies to observe when a chief returns." Emily nodded, settling onto a softened hide with hope cradled in her arms. The baby was awake now, dark eyes wide with what might have been wonder at the firelight and movement around her. Several older women approached, making soft sounds of admiration, reaching out to touch Hope's blanket or offer blessing gestures that transcended language barriers. The drums intensified, joined now by rattles and flutes in a complex music that made Emily's skin prickle with its haunting beauty. The crowd parted, and Makya appeared, flanked by 4 warriors in ceremonial dress. He wore traditional clothing Emily had never seen during their time together. A beautifully woven blanket draped over one shoulder, intricate beadwork adorning. His moccasins and shirt, eagle feathers bound into his hair. Despite his illness, he walked tall, his bearing regal as he approached the fire. In this moment, Emily fully understood what it meant that he was a chief, not merely in title, but in essence, in the deep respect reflected in every face that turned toward him. The elder, Makya's father, rose to meet him, and together they performed a ritual Emily couldn't interpret, but found deeply moving nonetheless. Words were exchanged in Navajo, followed by shared sips from a decorated vessel, and finally an embrace that spoke of forgiveness, of family bonds transcending disagreement. When Makya took his seat beside his father, his gaze found Emily and Hope across the fire. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement of the strange journey that had brought them to this moment, perhaps, or simple recognition of how their fates had become unexpectedly intertwined. The feast that followed was unlike anything Emily had experienced. Foods both familiar and strange were shared with precise protocols that Leotie quietly explained as they ate. Stories were told, some in English for Emily's benefit, others in Navajo with expressive gestures that conveyed meaning even without translation. Songs were sung, their melodies carrying emotions that required no interpretation. Throughout the evening, tribal members approached Emily individually or in small groups. Some simply wished to see Hope, to offer blessings or small gifts. A tiny woven bracelet, a rabbit's foot charm for protection, a beautifully carved wooden rattle. Others asked questions, curious about her past, her journey, her meeting with Makya. She answered truthfully but selectively, omitting details of Thomas's cruelty and her own naivety that had led to disaster. As the night progressed, Emily noticed Makya engaged in what appeared to be serious discussions with various tribal members. Occasionally, he would cough, turning away to hide the evidence of blood, but otherwise he maintained the dignified presence expected of his position. Once, she caught Talon watching his brother with an expression of mingled respect and concern, the complicated love of siblings whose paths had diverged but never truly separated. It was near midnight when Makya finally approached her, settling carefully onto the log beside her. Hope had fallen asleep hours earlier, nestled in a small cradle board Nijoni had provided, allowing Emily to eat and participate more fully in the celebrations. "You look better," Makya observed, "less pale." "Rest and food work wonders," Emily replied. "You, on the other hand, look exhausted." A small smile touched his lips. Honesty remains your most consistent trait, Emily Collins. Someone needs to speak plainly to you, especially now that you're surrounded by people who revere you too much to mention you're working yourself to death on your first day back. Instead of taking offense, Makya's smile deepened. I've missed your forthright manner. The reservation has many virtues, but plain speaking is rarely among them. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the dancing that had begun around the fire. Young men and women moved in patterns both beautiful and precise, their footwork telling stories through movement rather than words. What happens now? Emily finally asked, the question that had lingered since their arrival. For Hope and me, I mean. Makya's expression grew more serious. There has been much discussion of that tonight. The Indian agent will need to be informed of your presence, of course. He visits in 2 weeks' time. Anxiety flickered through Emily. And if he objects, then we will face that challenge when it comes. Makya glanced at the sleeping Hope. But the tribal council has reached a decision, if you are willing to hear it. Emily nodded, her throat suddenly dry with apprehension. The reservation school lacks a proper teacher. The last one, a white missionary, left 6 months ago after conflicts with the agent over methods. Makya's dark eyes met hers directly. The council proposes you take this position, teaching our children to read, write, and calculate in English, while our elders continue their instruction in our language and traditions. Emily's heart leaped at the unexpected offer. But, as I'm not a trained teacher, I've never... You were educated in the East. You managed your father's accounts. You read and write well. Makya interrupted gently. Those skills alone exceed what most Indian schools receive. More importantly, you have shown respect for our ways. You would not seek to erase our culture while teaching necessary skills for the changing world. The proposition was both exhilarating and terrifying. And what of Hope? Where would we live? There is a small dwelling attached to the schoolhouse, previously occupied by teachers. It would be yours. Makya coughed slightly, pressing a handkerchief briefly to his lips before continuing. As for Hope, many hands make light work with children here. The women would help while you teach. Emily found herself overwhelmed by the generosity of the offer, by the unexpected opportunity it presented. Not mere charity or temporary shelter, but purpose, independence, a chance to build something meaningful from the wreckage of her former life. I don't know what to say, she admitted, except thank you for everything, for my life, for hopes, for this chance. Makya nodded, accepting her gratitude with characteristic dignity. There is one more matter, he said, his tone shifting slightly. A more personal request, if you will permit it. Of course, Emily replied, curious at his suddenly formal manner. In our tradition, children sometimes receive special blessing or protection from tribal members beyond their parents, similar to what I believe your people call godparents. Makya's gaze moved to Hope's sleeping form. I would request this honor for your daughter, to stand as a guardian of her spirit and welfare, to ensure she grows knowing both sides of her heritage. Emotion welled in Emily's throat, nearly choking her ability to respond. The request touched her deeply, not merely for its face value, but for what it represented. Makya's commitment to their continued connection, his genuine concern for Hope's future beyond immediate survival. There is no one I would trust more with such a role, she managed finally. Hope already carries the name you suggested, Ahiga. It seems only fitting you should help guide her spirit as well. Relief and something like joy flickered across Makya's weathered features. Thank you. The ceremony would be performed before the Indian agent's arrival, if that meets with your approval. Emily nodded, unable to find adequate words for the complicated emotions swirling within her. Gratitude, hope, and lingering sadness for all that had been lost before these new beginnings could emerge. As if sensing her tumultuous feelings, Makia placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a rare physical gesture from the normally reserved chief. "You have traveled a difficult road, Emily Collins. But remember what I told you in the mountains. Paths reveal themselves, one step at a time." Spring flowed into summer, each day bringing new rhythms and routines to Emily and Hope's life on the reservation. The small teacher's dwelling had been carefully prepared before they moved in. Floors swept, walls freshly plastered with traditional mud mixed with straw, new wooden shutters fitted to the windows. The tribal women, led by Leotie and Nijoni, had brought essential items: cooking utensils, blankets, a cradle for Hope, dried foods to last until Emily could establish her own garden plot. The schoolhouse itself was a simple but sturdy structure, built by the government but modified by tribal members to better suit their needs. Rows of rough-hewn benches faced a large slate board, while shelves along one wall held a meager collection of books, mostly religious texts left by the missionary teacher, with a few basic primers and a tattered dictionary. Emily spent her first weeks observing the children, learning their names and abilities, understanding the complex dynamics of a classroom where ages ranged from 5 to 15 and prior education varied dramatically. Some of the older students had attended missionary schools elsewhere and could already read simple English. Others had never held a pencil before arriving at her classroom door. What struck her most was their eagerness to learn despite past disappointments, with white teachers who had treated their language and customs as obstacles to be overcome rather than foundations to build upon. When Emily asked them to teach her Navajo words, to explain tribal stories and traditions, their initial wariness transformed into excited sharing, building bridges of trust that strengthened daily. In the afternoons, after formal lessons ended, tribal elders would come to the schoolhouse to continue the children's education in traditional knowledge. Star navigation, plant identification, sacred stories and crafts essential to Navajo life. Emily made a point of sitting in on these sessions when possible, learning alongside her students, demonstrating through actions rather than words that she valued both forms of knowledge equally. Hope thrived in this environment of communal child-rearing. While Emily taught, the baby was passed between willing caretakers, grandmothers who sang traditional songs as they rocked her, young mothers who nursed their own infants alongside, her older girls practicing future maternal skills under watchful adult supervision. By the time Hope reached 4 months of age, she responded to both English and Navajo baby talk, her dark eyes tracking movement with alert intelligence, her smile emerging readily for familiar faces. The blessing ceremony Makia had requested took place on a clear June morning, timed to coincide with the tribe's summer solstice celebrations. Emily, now more familiar with Navajo customs, had prepared Hope with special care, bathing her in herb-infused water Nijoni provided, dressing her in a small buckskin outfit Leotie had made as a gift, weaving tiny turquoise beads into the wispy dark hair that had begun to grow more thickly. The ceremony itself was both simpler and more profound than Emily had anticipated. At sunrise, Makia led them to a secluded spot near a natural spring considered sacred by the tribe. There, with only Makia's father and Nijoni as witnesses, prayers were offered in the Navajo language, sacred herbs burned, and finally, Hope's feet were placed briefly in the spring waters, a symbolic connection to the land that would help sustain her. She belongs to 2 worlds now, Makia explained afterward as they walked back toward the settlement. The waters bind her to this place, these people, even as her blood connects her to yours. Emily, carrying Hope wrapped in a special blanket, given during the ceremony, felt tears prick her eyes at the simple beauty of this acceptance. "Thank you," she said softly, "for making space for us here." Makia nodded, his expression serene despite the persistent cough that still troubled him. Under Nijoni's care and with proper rest, his condition had stabilized somewhat, but Emily harbored no illusions about his long-term prognosis. Consumption, once deeply established, rarely released its victims entirely. "You have made your own space," he corrected gently. "The children speak of nothing but their new teacher who listens when they speak and answers when they question. The mothers appreciate your efforts to learn our ways rather than dismiss them." Even the agent seems cautiously approving, based on his last visit. That visit had been a tense affair, with the Indian agent, a thin, perpetually frowning man named Hollister, examining Emily and Hope as though they were peculiar specimens that had no business in his orderly system. But Makia and Talon had presented a united front, explaining Emily's position as the new teacher, emphasizing her qualifications and the tribal council's approval. "She's educated, familiar with proper American values, and the children respond well to her methods," Talon had pointed out pragmatically. "And she costs the government nothing beyond the standard teacher's allotment," Makia had added, knowing the agent's perpetual concern with budgets. "No need for additional housing construction or transportation expenses to bring someone from the East." In the end, practicality had won over prejudice. Hollister had grudgingly endorsed Emily's appointment, though not without warnings about maintaining appropriate standards and regular inspections that felt more like threats than administrative procedures. Now, 2 months later, Emily had begun to feel genuinely at home in her role and place within the community. The initial strangeness had faded, replaced by daily rhythms that brought unexpected contentment. Each morning, she would rise with the sun nurse Hope while reviewing lesson plans, then prepare for the day ahead. Children would arrive in small groups, often bearing small gifts, a freshly picked flower, an interesting stone, occasionally eggs or bread from families grateful for her attention to their offspring. The classroom hummed with energy as students progressed at their own pace through lessons tailored to their abilities. Emily drew on memories of her own education, on books salvaged from the limited reservation library, and increasingly on innovations born of necessity, using tribal counting games to teach mathematics, incorporating traditional stories as reading material when standard primers proved insufficient or culturally inappropriate. In the evenings, after putting Hope to bed, Emily often found herself on the small bench outside her dwelling, watching the stars emerge while the settlement settled into night routines around her. Sometimes Laerty would join her, bringing tea and quiet conversation about the day's events. Other times, Nijoni would visit, checking on Hope's development and sharing wisdom about child-rearing that blended traditional knowledge with practical experience. Makia came less frequently but regularly, usually bearing small gifts for Hope. A tiny deerskin pouch filled with protective herbs, a cunningly carved wooden animal, once a miniature bow that made Emily laugh at its perfect craftsmanship despite being sized for a child who couldn't yet sit unaided. These visits held a bittersweet quality that neither acknowledged directly. Makia's health, while stabilized, showed no signs of significant improvement. The borrowed time they both knew he was living on gave their conversations a depth and honesty that might otherwise have taken years to develop. It was during one such evening visit, as autumn began painting the surrounding landscape in golds and reds, that Makia brought news that would reshape Emily's understanding of her place in the tribe. "The council has been discussing your status," he began, settling carefully onto the bench beside her. Hope, now nearly 6 months old, sat in Emily's lap, gumming a smooth stone Makia had brought on his previous visit. "Your position as teacher is secure, but there are broader considerations." Emily felt a flicker of anxiety. "What considerations?" "Your future here. Hope's future." Makia paused, choosing his words with characteristic care. "In our tradition, Children belong not just to their parents, but to the tribe as a whole. Hope has been embraced as one of our own through the blessing ceremony, but her official status, in the eyes of both our people and the white authorities, remains ambiguous. Emily's arms tightened instinctively around her daughter. "What are you saying? That someone is questioning her place here?" "Not questioning, clarifying," Makia corrected gently. "The Indian agent has raised concerns about inheritance rights, about how tribal benefits might apply to her as she grows. And looking further ahead, about potential complications if you were to form new attachments." The delicate phrasing almost made Emily smile, despite her concern. "You mean if I were to marry again?" Makia nodded. "That possibility, while perhaps distant now, must be considered in planning for Hope's security." Emily considered this thoughtfully. The idea of remarriage had not entered her mind since Thomas's abandonment, her focus entirely consumed by survival, childbirth, and establishing their new life. Yet Makia was right to raise the issue. She was young, only 24, with potentially a long life ahead. Hope deserved the most secure future possible, whatever that might entail. "What solution does the council propose?" she asked, sensing there was more to this conversation than mere speculation. "Formal adoption," Makia replied. "Not to replace you as Hope's mother, but to establish her officially as a child of the tribe. She would have dual status, recognized as your daughter in the white world's eyes and as a daughter of the Dine in ours, with all the protections and rights that entails." The proposal struck Emily as both radical and perfectly logical. Who would be the adopting party? Under normal circumstances, a family would be selected, perhaps Talon and Laerty, who have shown great affection for her. Makia's expression shifted subtly. "But given my role in your lives and the blessing ceremony already performed, the council suggests I should hold this honor." Emily's breath caught at the unexpected turn. "You? But your health?" Makia's smile held a trace of sadness. "We both know I may not see Hope reach womanhood, but my position ensures that even after I join my ancestors, she will retain the status and protection my name provides. It is a matter of legal standing more than daily care." The practicality of the arrangement was undeniable, yet Emily sensed deeper currents beneath the surface, unspoken feelings. Complex bonds formed through their shared journey from that snowy mountainside to this moment. And if... Emily hesitated, unsure how to phrase the delicate question. If someday I did remarry, how would this arrangement affect Hope's status? "It would remain unchanged," Makia assured her. "Any future husband would be Hope's stepfather in white law, while she would retain her place in the tribe through the adoption. The arrangement protects her from being uprooted or losing her heritage, while placing no restrictions on your personal choices." The thoroughness with which the council had considered every angle impressed Emily. There was wisdom here that transcended cultural differences, that recognized the complexity of human relationships and sought to create structures that supported rather than constrained them. "I would be honored to accept this arrangement," she said finally, looking down at Hope, who had abandoned the stone to reach for Makia's turquoise necklace with determined little fingers. "For both our sakes." Relief flickered across Makia's features. The ceremony would be simple but binding. "We would register the adoption formally when the Indian agent returns, ensuring it is recognized by both tribal and territorial authorities." Emily nodded, then asked the question that had been forming in her mind throughout their conversation. "Makia, be honest with me. How much of this was your idea?" The chief's dark eyes held hers steadily. "The concerns are genuine. The solution benefits all involved." He paused, then admitted, "But yes, I may have guided the council's thinking in this direction. Why? Emily pressed gently. Makia's gaze shifted to Hope, who had succeeded in grasping his necklace and was examining the turquoise pendant with intense concentration. Because some bonds transcend explanation. Because I found you in the snow and something inside me, something I thought had died during my exile, awakened at that moment. His voice remained calm, matter of fact, but Emily heard the emotion beneath the words. Because this child, though not of my blood, has become as dear to me as if she were. The simple honesty of his declaration moved Emily deeply. It wasn't romance or passion he offered. Those belonged to a different kind of relationship entirely, but something equally powerful. A commitment that asked nothing in return except the opportunity to protect and guide the child who had, through circumstance and choice, become the unexpected focus of his remaining years. Hope could have no finer guardian for her spirit, Emily said softly. We both are blessed by your presence in our lives. Makia inclined his head, accepting her words with characteristic dignity. Then, perhaps to lighten the emotional weight of the moment, he gently reclaimed his necklace from Hope's grasp, replacing it with a small wooden toy he produced from a pouch at his belt. The baby's squeal of delight broke the solemnity, bringing smiles to both adults' faces. As they sat together in the gathering dusk, watching Hope explore her new treasure, Emily reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her here. Thomas's betrayal, once the greatest tragedy she could imagine, had ultimately opened the door to something far richer than the narrow life she might have led as a miner's wife. Her desperate flight into the mountains, seemingly a death sentence for her, and her unborn child had instead become the first step toward an unexpected home. The future still held uncertainties. Makia's health would continue its slow decline. The Indian agent's tolerance might be tested by changing policies from distant Washington. The broader society beyond the reservation boundaries remained largely hostile to the kind of cross-cultural family they were creating. Yet sitting here, with Hope gurgling happily in her lap and Makia's steady presence beside her, Emily felt something she had not experienced since childhood. Peace. Not the fragile peace of ignorance or isolation, but the deeper tranquility that comes from finding one's true place in the world, from connections forged through genuine understanding rather than convention or expectation. As the first stars appeared overhead, Emily silently offered gratitude to whatever forces, divine or circumstantial, had guided her through the winter of near death into this unexpected spring. The path ahead would never be easy, but it was hers to walk, not alone as she had once feared, but surrounded by a community that had found room in its heart for a pregnant woman left to die in winter, and the chief who had saved her. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.